Hello everyone and thanks for joining me for this new video. Today's video will probably be less spectacular than the one where we were building Airbnb bricks, but I've received a lot of requests to explain a bit more how the new Structeezy code parser works, what is the syntax that I use, so it will probably be less spectacular but much more practical and useful in your day-to-day development with bricks and Structeezy. So we are in bricks. I have the Structeezy panel open. We will focus on this area for the moment. And you probably already know that Structeezy is all about helping you be much more productive working in your page structure and your structure tree. And since version 1.2, Structeezy embeds a custom-made code parser with a code editor, and this code parser is able to turn code that you enter or that you copy and paste in the editor into bricks elements and bricks structure. Someone asked me in a Facebook group, hey Cedric, but what is a structure? Well, a structure is anything that you will find in your structure tree. It can be the whole tree, it can be a branch, it can be a leaf. A leaf is a terminal element. Well, any part of your structure tree is a structure and can be used, saved, and reused in Structeezy. So let's have a look at what is feasible. So just to start with, we have a code editor window. There are a few functionalities with this code editor. I can start writing HTML and you see that there is an autocomplete feature. It is preset on HTML language, so it will suggest HTML tags and attributes. So let's imagine I want to write a block quote. I select the block quote, press enter, and it is pre-filled with my block quote. The code editor I use also have, I would say, hidden feature. You have to know that it's there, but you can press Control F or Command F on a Mac, and this opens a search feature when you can find, replace elements inside of your code. So this can be very helpful. For example, if you copy and paste HTML from an external source and that you want to replace elements or replace class names or replace attribute values, well, you have this handy function that you can use. Let's say that I want to replace my block quote. Found it because it's highlighted by simply a site tag, and I want to replace all, and everything was replaced. So let's try writing something simple. I want a section. Inside of my section, I want a div. And inside of my div, I want an h1 with the text of my heading. Once I'm happy with my structure, I will click parse and inject, and Structeezy will convert this HTML structure to bricks elements with the proper tags and attributes. And when I say proper tags and attributes, for example, for my heading, I want an h1, but maybe I want an h2. And when I click parse and inject, Structeezy did create the structure. We can see with the icons that it used the corresponding bricks elements, a section element, a div, and heading elements. And that's already interesting because, as you know, in bricks, you can use the heading element, but when you insert a heading element, by default, it is an h3, so you have to insert a heading element. You have to come to the content to modify it to my heading, and then you have to change the HTML tag to an h1. With Structeezy, you simply write an h1, my heading, and everything is inserted with the proper tag and with the proper content. Maybe you think it's nothing, it's 1 second, 2 seconds, but multiply 1 second or 2 seconds per the number of elements you insert when you build a website, multiplied by the number of pages and the number of websites that you create. And at the end, these seconds can be hours. Okay, let's get rid of this and come back to our editor. So for now, we just inserted HTML tags, and that's it. And also with a text content for our headings. With the editor, you can also directly insert the elements, of course, but also the element attributes in HTML. You have several attributes that you can write on an element. Some of them you already know for sure, a class, an ID, but there are plenty of attributes that you can write on your element. So for example, that will be particularly helpful if you have written your CSS somewhere, you have a style sheet and you want to use the CSS classes from your style sheet, or if you are working with a CSS framework, of course it can be my framework, BRXTML, or another one. And here again, you can do several things at once because I can write a section, but this section will have a class. And you see that this time I have an auto-completion suggestion for the attribute. Let's choose the class. And I will use a class, for example, o-height-full, because I want my section to be full height. Then I want it to have an ID, and I want an ID of my dash section. And as I want my section to create a proper landmark, a region, I will add an area dash, and that's the labeled by that I want, equal, and I will create an ID that will be my dash heading, and then I will create an h1 with an ID of my heading. This will be my heading, and the editor understands that I want to close the tag, so it suggests me the closing tag, and same thing for my section. And just before I click parse and inject, I will toggle off the strip class option because I did write a class name and I want to keep it. This option is useful when you import code from an external source with a lot of classes that you don't necessarily want to keep and to register with your Bricks global classes. So when the toggle is on, the parser will behave as if the class didn't exist. But in my case, I want to keep the classes. So let's keep it off. And you can choose from the plugin settings what is the initial state. My personal preference is to strip the classes by default to be sure that I will not insert unwanted classes in my Bricks database, but it's up to you. You can decide from the dashboard. So let's click parse and inject. By default, the code in the editor was cleared after injection. This was a request from users, and you have an option in the dashboard to decide if you want to clear or not the code after each injection. If you don't want to clear it automatically, you always have the small trash icon to clear code when you want to. My personal preference is to keep it so I can check if everything is okay and make adjustment. So I clear, make adjustment, insert, inject again, until I'm satisfied with the structure. So let's have a look. We have added IDs, attributes, and classes. So my section has an ID of my sections, that's the ID I entered, has the class of o-height-full that I did enter. And if we go and have a look at the bottom of the Styles tab, it is area labeled by my heading. And my heading has an ID of my heading. So once again, I could define everything at once from my editor. And if I had to do it the standard Bricks way, well, I would have to insert my section, then select my section, add the class, then rename my ID, save, then go to the Style tab, go to my attributes, add an attribute, name it area label by, and give the value of my heading. Okay, we can achieve exactly the same using Bricks UI. In my opinion, it's just a bit easier and faster from Structeezy code parser. Okay, so we can add classes, we can add attributes, custom attributes, data attributes, area attributes, any attribute actually. And there's a special attribute, and this also comes from discussion with users in the Facebook group. I can create, let's use a section again, with a special attribute that will be seasy for Structeezy equals, and you can type anything you want. This is, let's try something useful, my hero section. And when I use this specific seasy attribute and that I parse and inject, Structeezy understands that with this attribute you want to label your element in your structure tree. This is a specific attribute used to label your elements. Without it, if I write a simple div, and if I write a div with seasy equals my div, and that I inject, you see that the first one only has the tag as the element label, and the second one has the tag plus whatever I did input in the seasy attribute. So of course, seasy is not a standard HTML attribute. It's a special one that I use to define the label. So until now, we have used HTML tags and converted them into Bricks elements. But Structeezy parser is able to understand more than only HTML elements. Actually, it understands a hybrid language, which is the BRXTML syntax. And BRXTML is able to mix HTML tags and Bricks elements. For example, I can write the following structure. I can write a section, and a section is an actual HTML tag. But inside of my section, I can ask for a container. You see that the editor is not suggesting a container because container is not an HTML tag. But I can still write it. And inside of my container, why not, I can have a block. And inside of my block, I can have a heading. There's not a lot of sense to ask a heading because, as we saw earlier, we will have to go and modify the tags, but why not? We can add HTML, a paragraph, but we can also add a text element. And if I'm not mistaken, we should get a rich text element, etc. So you see that we are mixing standard HTML and Bricks elements. And the parser is able to understand this, to sort what is actual HTML and what is Bricks elements, and create the structure. So if we have a look at the result, we have a Bricks section with the tag of section. We have a Bricks container with the usual icon. We have a div block. We have a Bricks block, a heading, a paragraph, and a text. So let's check. Our text element is the rich text element, so this worked as expected. Our paragraph is the basic text element with the tag of P for the paragraph. The heading is a heading element with the standard settings, a default H3. We have our block our container, and our section. Okay, so that's interesting because you can mix HTML and Bricks elements. And if you are using third-party element libraries, if you are using BRXTML, you will have the BRXTML elements with the light and dark theme switcher, for example, or the unlimited icon element. But if you use popular libraries like BRXExtra, for example, Structeezy parser will also be able to use these third-party elements and convert the code to these elements. Actually, any element living inside of your Bricks elements panel can be used with the parser. For example, I want a div, and inside of my div, I want the BRXTML icon element. Its name is OIcon. And if I inject this structure, I get my div and I get my custom element. So it's probably a bit tricky to know what is the actual element name for your third-party libraries. If you have a look at the Structeezy website, you will find the names for the OxyProps, BRXTML elements. These are my elements, so of course I know their names. I also added the names for the BRXExtra library, so you can find them on the documentation site. And if you are using other libraries and you would like to know the names of the elements, let me know, and I will do my best to get the names and have them listed somewhere on the documentation site. Okay, just before we go further with more advanced feature and in particular dynamic data, the code editor includes Emmet. If you are code editor users, VS Code user or other editor user, you probably know what Emmet is. And if you don't know what it is, Emmet is a set of tools to help developers write code faster. It uses a syntax very similar to CSS and CSS selectors to create code snippets that will expand into HTML structure. I won't go in the details of Emmet syntax here. Maybe we could make a dedicated video about Emmet. Let me know if you are interested. But just to give you an idea, when you write an Emmet snippet, so first the idea is not to write big snippets that will create a whole page. It's not the point. You could do it, but it won't be very efficient. The best is to write small code snippets, use them and then write other ones right after and proceed step by steps. So let's imagine I want to recreate the same kind of structure I just did, very simple ones, but I can write the tag name. I want a section, and I can give this section various attributes. The first one is a class. We often want to add a class, and you know that in CSS, the selector for a class is a dot. And let's edit the class we did earlier, o-height-full. And I want also my section to have an ID, so I will add an hash symbol, and this will be my section. Okay, so the tag name, a dot for the class name. You can chain as many class names as you want. Of course, you can have only one ID for an element, but as many class names as you want. So I could add a class of my class, my other class, etc. Let's try to spell things correctly. And when I'm finished with my snippet, I press Tab, and Emmet did convert it to the proper syntax. So I have a section with all my classes and my ID. So that's not very impressive, but what's interesting with Emmet is that I can use operators. For example, inside of my section, I want elements. And in CSS, the parent to child selector is the greater than sign. So if I add a greater than sign, I can add a container. This is not an HTML tag, this is a Bricks element, but this will work. Inside of my container, I will add an h1 with a class of, I don't know, for example, O-font8 with an ID of my heading, and at the same level inside of my container I want a paragraph. So the paragraph will be a sibling to the h1, and you know that the CSS selector for a sibling is the plus sign, so let's write a plus. I will write P for the HTML tag, paragraph P, and this one will have a class of O-font1. I can press tab to expand my snippet and I get this structure. I have my section, a container, an h1, at the same level, the sibling, a paragraph, and then the closing tag for my container and my section. And I can inject this and I get the corresponding structure. If I want to add content at the same time, so let's recall my Emmet snippet, get rid of my structure. For now, my h1, my heading, and my paragraph are empty tags. There is no content. In Emmet, if I want to add text content, it's very easy. I use curly brackets, and inside of those curly brackets, I will add my text content. For example, this is my h1, and then same thing for my paragraph. This is my paragraph content. I expand my snippet and you can see that I have my text content inside of my opening and closing tags. If I inject, I will get my elements with content. I won't go much further with Emmet. Just know that you can do very useful things with it. Maybe let's try one that is a bit spectacular. Imagine you want to write a list, a bullet list. So you will create a UL. Inside of this UL, you will have list items, li. And I want 5 of them. So I multiply by 5. And I want each of them to have an ID of item dash, and I want them to be numbered, so I will add a $sign. Let's expand this, and you can see that I get my unordered list with 5 LIs, each of them being identified with an ID in incremental order. And if I inject this into Bricks, you know that Bricks don't have native UL and li elements, so Structeezy will convert it, and it's not very visible because I didn't add content, but we can see the list and the bullets with the empty items, but we have created a list. It's a Bricks div element, we can see it here, with list item containers, which also are divs. But they have a custom HTML tag, and the tag is li. So let's finish with dynamic data. There are two kinds of dynamic data you can use with Structeezy. The first one is bricks dynamic data. This is something very useful, you know that, especially when you have custom post types with custom fields and that you want to pull dynamic data in your query loop or anywhere in your elements. So let's say that I want to create, and I will use Emmet because it's faster, I want to create a section. And inside of this section, I will have a container. This is typical. I will have an h2. I won't bother with classes and IDs, but I could add a class or several classes and an ID, but I will focus on content. We saw that we use curly brackets and that with curly brackets, we can add content. And inside of this content, we can use static data. That's what we did earlier by writing my heading. But let's say that I want my heading to be my post title. And for the example, I will mix static and dynamic text. So I will write that my post title column is, and then I will add another pair of curly brackets. So that's important. The first pair of curly brackets is the instruction to Emmet to add content to the element. And then inside of this pair of curly brackets, the other pair will be instructions for bricks to insert dynamic data. And the dynamic data I want to insert is the post underscore title. Then I will have a sibling. This will be a paragraph with the content of summary, column, and another pair of curly brackets. And this will be my post underscore excerpt. Let's expand this. And if I spell everything correctly, we should get yes. You saw that we first saw our curly brackets. Well, the result will depend on your brick setting. You need to have the render dynamic data on canvas activated. So there's no excerpt for my post, so the summary dynamic data is empty, but we have the post title that did appear. And if we go and have a look here, we are using dynamic data. So you can write any kind of dynamic data in the code editor, either with Emmet, but it would be the same by writing standard HTML and adding here are my curly brackets with my post underscore title. This will get me an h1, and my h1 content is my post title. Okay, so anything that you can find in the list of dynamic data, WordPress fields or ACF fields or metabox field or anything can be used in the code editor. And to finish with, Structeezy also has its own dynamic data. So what is Structeezy own dynamic data? I will give you two examples. The first one is a simple one. Imagine that's a very classical one. I want to create a footer, and inside of this footer I will have a paragraph, and inside of this paragraph I will have a text, standard usual text, which will be copyright dash, and now I want to output the current year and I want it to be dynamic. I don't want to come and change the year every year. So I will use a Structeezy dynamic field, and to use Structeezy dynamic field we use a templating syntax with a double curly bracket and uppercase current year, and then another dash, and then I will add with simple curly bracket this time a bricks dynamic field, which will be my, I think it's the site name. It's not the site name, it's the site title. Let's check. So I expand it, parse and inject, and let's zoom out, and that's it. I got my copyright, the current year, and the site name. Okay, so that's another one, another kind of dynamic data that can be used in your code snippets, in your Structeezy components. And I have on my roadmap the fact that to let users define their own dynamic fields. So there are a few ones currently existing, like this one. There's the unique ID, we will just have a look right now. But my plan is to give you the possibility to define your own dynamic data that you can use in your templates. So the last one is the unique ID. It's very useful, and I will show you why. It's actually very useful when you want to create a reusable component and use it several times on your page. First, you know that in an HTML document, an element ID must be unique. You cannot have two different elements having the same ID. This would not be valid HTML. So usually Brix handles this pretty well with dynamic IDs it generates. The problem comes when you use templates or you copy paste one of your elements or you duplicate elements where you did manually define an ID. If you remember, earlier in this video, we did define the ID for some of our elements. And if you define an ID and duplicate your element, well, the duplicated element will get the same ID. So let me show you what the problem is. In your HTML document, if you want to generate a proper landmark for a section, a region landmark, you need to link your section to its heading with an area labeled by attribute. So you need to have your section with an attribute of area. So let's create a section with an area labeled by attribute, and this will be my heading, and then my heading has an ID of my heading. Okay, if I inject this, I get my section with an area labeled by that points, let me move my head, that points to the ID my heading, and my h2 as an ID of my heading. This works. If I save, look at the front end, and inspect my accessibility tree, I have a region that is labeled by my heading. And this is what we expect. Now, if I try to duplicate this, so we get two sections with two headings. Let's call this one my second heading. Save. And if I check, I have my two headings, but I don't have two regions. And actually, my second region has a heading of my second heading, but because we did duplicate the section, it is linked to the heading in the first section. So the second region is labeled by my first heading. The correct result would be to have the second region labeled my second heading, which is not the case. And this is because when duplicating the region, the section, Brix did not keep the link between the heading and the section. So what we can do is use a dynamic unique ID. And you can do the same when you are saving your own structure, not necessarily when using the code editor and the parser. So if I keep the same code and I want to make it dynamic, let's get rid of the class to focus on the IDs. So I want to generate unique IDs each time I insert a new structure. So my heading, I will add a dash, double curly brackets, and UID, uppercase. And I will do the same on my heading. And I can do the same for the my section ID if I want. And what Structeezy will do is that each time it will process this component, this structure, this code snippet, but that would be the same if you had saved it as a custom structure. It will generate a unique ID that will be inserted in this dynamic field when creating the structure. So let's have a look. If I inject, and then I inject another one, and another one, I got 3 headings. So this one is my second heading. This one is my third heading. And before we go and dig into the IDs, we can see here that there is this unique ID that was added to my heading. And if we check the front end, we have 3 different regions, and each one is properly labeled by its own heading. And by creating a unique ID each time you use the component, you keep the link between the section and its heading because the ID is unique each time. And that's it for this walkthrough of the Structeezy BRXTML syntax. We spend a lot of time in the code editor. That's not as sexy as building beautiful design, but that's necessary and useful because this way you can get much more efficient and productive when working in Bricks editor. I hope you liked it. If there are things you would like to know or you would like me to develop further, let me know in the comments. I wish you a lot of enjoyment with the Structeezy parser, and I'll see you in the next video.